to click like, subscribe, the bell notification, and whatever else YouTube has you clicking on to support us.
Welcome back to Tokunomics, everyone. I'm Kyōryū Kane, and today we're going to be ripping open the economics of a tokusatsu series that helped kickstart a multi-billion-dollar enterprise here in the United States. Basically, how did the rubber suits build this franchise? And that is Kyōryū Sentai Zyuranger. I had to look down because I am terrible at remembering the full name of all of these Sentai series. I usually only know it by its last name. So let's talk about the business model. First and foremost, it's the early 90s. And Toei is not a Hollywood studio. It's a production company with significant infrastructure, including studios in Tokyo and Kyoto. The company maintains in-house facilities for costume production, effects work, and stunt coordination that gave them considerable control over their own production process. The business model is straightforward. Television promoted toys, toys funded the television show, and Zyuranger existed to continue selling those Bandai toys. This was a fundamental economics of Sentai and Tokusatsu more broadly. So the real budget, what do we know? Once again, as you may have heard in my last video, I do not have the official budgets. Toei, as an organization, has not publicly disclosed what the production numbers look like for any of their shows. They will show basics on profits and loss, but they won't give estimates of what everything looks like. So any numbers that I share in my videos are educated guesses based on what I was able to find from somewhat reliable sources. I say somewhat because there's no guarantee unless the company publicly releases it. I can just do my best educated guess on what I was able to find, as well as comparable programming that can help answer some of those questions. So with this in mind, we're looking at a television show in 1992 that really ranged between about $100,000 per episode, which in 1992 is still quite expensive. And this is probably one of those few series that started to kick off a lot of new elements within Tokusatsu, which is one of the reasons why I think Hayao Saban was really interested in bringing it over to the United States. So when we look at this, what does the cost of production typically cover? And I know I went over this briefly in the last episode, but now that we're talking about an actual series, I want to be able to highlight what it's going to cover. Cast salaries, stunt salaries, the monster, the ranger and villain suit fabrication and repairs or recreations, any miniatures that have to be specifically constructed for the show, which could be buildings, bridges, streets, anything. The explosion practical effects. That's not cheap to blow things up. And if you blow something up and it didn't work and you have to do it all over again, that's more money that you put into the pot. And then anything post-production. And finally, which is sometimes the most expensive outside of the people, is location and facility shots. Because if you do not own where you're shooting, you have to rent those sites, and you have to make sure that you have the permits, you have the costs, and everything attributed to it. So when we think about a show costing about $100,000, in 1992, once again, that's expensive. In today's numbers, that's about half as much as what it costs. And this is nowhere near what we're looking at for film budgets. When we think about the actors and suit performers that are in these shows, the majority of the suit performers or stunt performers, anybody like that, is actually salaried. So Toei does one really smart thing when they look at their stunt performers, their suit actors, and things like that, is they have full-time jobs. So unlike a regular star of the show, when you think of the main 5 to 6 rangers and any unsuited villains that are physically there, they are contracted for a set period of time, be it for this show 50 episodes, for others it could be 30, 40, what have you. The stunt and suit actors, they could be working on Zyuranger. They could then be working on Kamen Rider, whichever series was airing. Actually, I don't think anything was airing at that time, but whatever other shows were airing, so it would be Metal Heroes. So they were working on this, Metal Heroes, and maybe any other live action productions that Toei was doing. So they're full-time salaried employees. So while their money does come from the production of the show because they're assigned to it, more of the cost is going to be going to the actors. And when I say it's going to be going to the actors, it's actually probably going to be going majority in a scaled process. So the actors who are much more well known, that have a lot of history for them. The more, I hate to say it, but it's truthfully in the grand scheme of things, the more recognizable names or faces are going to get a little bit more money. And then the main cast, especially for the Rangers, who are typically younger, first or second time in their career, they could be making base wage, because the expectation for a show like this is that this is to build your career. This is to create that fame. You're not already coming in with fame. You're starting it. So more often than not, they pay lower, and then the thought process is the intrinsic value of what they can obtain from coming onto the show, getting other gigs, is really what's going to build it. So I would say, if we look at it from other things that I've seen, some of these actors could be earning a modest wage. If we look at what 2025's modest wage is, they could be looking at $50,000. And like I said, this is completely an educated guess based on what I've been seeing, but $50,000 to $100,000, maybe, give or take, because they're not at that point in their career where they can really push for more money. And so with the salaried employees, they're getting whatever their guaranteed salary is for whatever contract they have. So it's fairly modest, barely livable, and that's why a lot of times, especially now, you'll see a lot of those Toku actors and actresses tend to leave celebrity life, so to speak, after a period of time, because they can make more money in a, so to speak, civilian world than they can being an actor and actress. Because just like it is here in the United States for Hollywood, only a small percentage of people who have starred in films blow up to be world recognizing names. The other portion of it tends to be more, they do it and they make enough to earn a living, and that's good enough for them. So that's kind of how we have to look at it. So when we look at the cost of building the Zords, as we call them in America, or any of the mechs and all of the suits, for the heroes, for the villains, the monster suits, we're looking at, in American numbers, between $1,000 to $5,000 per suit. And this is taking on data from other shows that have built custom monster suits. And they're expensive because they're very intricate. They have a lot of different things, especially if you do a series that has different themes to it. It could be themes of, like, I'm going to take Boom Boonger, for example. When you had technology versus creature, you have to think about how much it's going to cost to create that, because you have to plan it. You have to make sure it looks right. You have to make sure it's physically workable, that somebody in that suit can move around safely and effectively for whatever the shot's going to be. So those suits can be fairly expensive, which is why they try to make them as efficiently and as expertly as possible, so they don't have to constantly do repairs to them. So when you do see shows end up reusing the same monster suit or doing a repaint of it, it's because they're trying to get a return on that investment, because if you use it one and done, oh my Lord, that's a lot of money you put down to never see it come back. Then you have to think about all of the miniatures. You could be making miniatures for everything, and depending on how complex they're going to be, are they going to have like the little cars where they move down the street themselves, like the little RC cars or anything like that? Are you going to have it where everything has to be able to crumble on the right cue? That can be very expensive and be in the hundreds to tens of thousands of dollars. So that's once again another reason why you will end up seeing a lot of the same miniatures, set pieces from other shows, because if they can rinse and repeat in different ways and still make it work, absolutely, it's going to help put down that cost and lower what additional costs are going to be needed to make the show successful. Then we have to think once again about Toei's superpower from 1972, I'm going to say, with the Star of Kamen Rider all the way to today. And that is their ability to recycle. So a lot of what they've accumulated, especially over the 16 years of Super Sentai by Zyuranger's starting point, is they have tons of miniatures. They have a lot of monster designs. They have a lot of designs of other weapons that have been used in prior shows, of different costumes, set pieces, everything. And even the pyrotechnics. It's amazing what you can take advantage of when you already have the rigs set up for pyrotechnics. And you can make it work, because since you already have it created, it's either just updating the assets or making them look different. So entire fight sequences could be filmed using sets and equipment that had been paid off by those earlier productions. And any company worth their weight in gold would definitely make that a priority, because it's going to help them make it more profitable, because the less money that you have to put up front, the more profitable it will be in the end. And so where is the real money going into? And this is where it's kind of funny. The real money is going into all of the items that are going to be turned into toys. So you have Daijujin, you have Dragon Caesar, you have all of any other giant mech type creatures, or the monsters, where like the Frankenstein monster, I'm nowhere near the level of kaiju. I'm remembering all the creatures' names, but when you have the Satan Frankenstein monster creature and it had to keep on changing its appearance, that costs a lot of money, because you're having to make individualized suits. So you have that, you have all the weapons, you have all of the things that can go into making action toys, marketable products such as candy toys, food things, anything where your product is going to be visible or sold in some sort of capacity. So while the revenue figures aren't public, the toy sales are what help generate the funding to make each subsequent series. So the more profitable the prior series is where they can fund the future series. So the more and more money they have, the more high class they can make it. And I say that because technically Zyuranger does something very different than many of its predecessors. It has the specialized design of the creatures. I think the creatures definitely took an upgrade since Jetman and the prior series on how they look. You also have your first Sixth Ranger, so you have the opportunity to now have an additional character, which is another cost stream, because you have a character that's going to be there for a period of time. You also have more involved villains. You have a greater dynamic of how everything is being built. You are literally living in Zyuranger, a very well-presented RPG, in my opinion. It is what I think got me into JRPGs. When I think about that, obviously I watched Zyuranger much later in life, but I think it's what really reinvigorated my love of JRPGs, of the Final Fantasy, and those classical type stylings. And so the toys are really where the money is made. And that's where Toei can really take advantage as a cost model for them, because you have licensing fees. Because every product that wants to showcase your figure, your character figure on it, is going to have to pay you pennies on the dollar for it. And so you have those licensing fees. And this is where I will say, and I'll get into it a little bit more, why Power Rangers was so successful and financially possible. Because when Saban approached and licensed Zyuranger in '93, the most expensive production elements of the show were already done. You already had the hero costumes, you already had the mechs, you already had the monster costumes, the explosion sequences, and fight choreography. So really, what America was doing with Saban is they had to film new American footage with young actors that could be representative of the cast of characters in different sites. So be it warehouses, on streets that could be pretend looking like Japan or their command center. You can license that existing footage from Japan along with those assets to make them much cheaper. So even if they did have to recreate any of the costumes for the American Power Rangers to wear, they were able to do so because they already had the template to make it work. And in fact, when Saban asked for additional footage, and I hope to talk about this a little bit further down the line as well, commonly known as the Ju-2 footage, they were able to once again do a lot of cost-saving methods, because all Japan had to do for Toei's side of it when creating these Ju-2 footage items is they didn't have to create a full story. They didn't even have to create anything beyond the monsters, the battles, the costume design, the choreography, stunt coordination. So a lot of it, admittedly, they already could take advantage of because they had some of the molds, some of the assets already, and they had a retainer of staff that could do stunt work. So it wasn't a lot of new things they had to do. They didn't have to recast or bring in the original actors. They just had the costumes, and they didn't have to figure out how to sell this to Japan, because Japan would be getting this through reverse importation when they saw Power Rangers. So when they got the show Power Rangers in Japan, they got to also experience that Ju-2 footage. So whereas this could cost them maybe $1 million, and this is factoring in they had to create roughly about 33 more episodes worth of monster designs and things like that, it could be roughly about $1 million, because if you think about the cost of, let's say, $5,000 for the monster designs, that 5 times 30 is fairly inexpensive. even if you had to go up to 10,000 for 33, you're looking at $33,000 or $330,000 in costumes. And then having to update the ranger suits if they were damaged or anything like that due to lack of use. And any other costumes that they had to do, locations, set pieces. If they've already had it under contract and were already using it for something else, it's fairly inexpensive. So a lot of the money they can make is really, once again, that new licensing fee and all of the profits that can come from it. And from discussing with Kaiju, because I actually stopped watching Power Rangers myself around the time the G2 footage was coming out. I probably saw episodes but didn't consciously recognize it. He had shared with me that all of the figures that were made of the G2 footage of the villains were actually released by Bandai. So they even made additional money because that's an additional revenue stream of toy sales for a series that was already off the air and had already concluded, and these were just brand new monsters that you could add to your collection, which I think is a very strategic and savvy business practice to do, especially when Saban was taking advantage of it for their own show. And they were able to bring out more than the 50 episodes, because it was closer to about 73 episodes, because they only used about 40 of the original series and then the 33 additional. So I think it was great, and that's where Power Rangers was also able to help make more money for Zyuranger. And then, in conclusion, I will say that Zyuranger wasn't cheap. It was probably, at the time, one of the more expensive Sentai shows that was airing at the time, because it did expand significantly more on set pieces and creative designs that had not been used previously. And it used a significant more amount of effects, costume design, and took advantage of what they learned over the last 16 years for Super Sentai, as well as what was learned from other tokusatsu shows. So with that in mind, it could make it grow, and it could make it more impressive and expansive. And by the introduction of having it turned into Power Rangers within America, it also expanded how Zyuranger was received to worldwide audiences. And while for many of us as children back in the 90s, that's how we consumed Zyuranger. We didn't know Zyuranger was a thing. We saw it through the Power Rangers lens and didn't learn about it until years later, either due to streaming or due to when Shout Factory released it, or however other means many of us learned about it when it wasn't in real-time airing. So I find it fascinating to think from a business aspect that Toei by this time could recycle and reuse so many of its costumes, so many of its designs, to take advantage of it from prior shows and make it work here. I also love the fact that they were able to continue doing so for future years to come. And not just for the special times where you had like old Rangers come for the Versus movies, or you had old Rangers come for the anniversary series. You were able to see it in real time play out through having a repaint or a reuse of old monsters in the background, like in Car Ranger. Anytime you were in the monster's lair, you could see different costumes being used from older series because they had them. Why not take advantage of them? So it's fascinating from a business perspective, and I'm hoping that you find it just as fascinating as I do, and you don't find it boring either. So please like, subscribe, share any feedback, share it with your friends or others that want to see the business end of it. And if there's other things I can talk about on the business end of Super Sentai, please do let me know, or the business end when it comes to Kamen Rider or anything else Tokusatsu. I would love to hear it, and I would love to hear your perspectives too. So thank you again. This is Tokunomics. I'm Curly Cocaine, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!